Hey guys, hold on, it's a little dark, so let me just turn on a light. That's better. I pretty much exclusively talk about content on video games, but there's times where I just have to talk about what is most interesting to me. Star Wars discourse. It's sad that I care, I know. Star Wars has been in what can only be described as a weird place ever since the end of the sequel trilogy. I've watched every live-action Star Wars TV show released since then, and today I'm reviewing each season of each show in release order, giving them a score out of 50 points based on 5 categories. Set design/direction, characters/acting, story, music, and personal enjoyment. Let's start with The Mandalorian Season 1. I think the first season of The Mandalorian is, as I'm sure most will agree, really good. Starting with sets/direction, the show looks great in the first season, with good framing, practical effects, and no wonky CGI. Pretty straightforward, I'm gonna call that a 9 out of 10. Moving to characters/acting, the Mandalorian himself is established very well in the first episode. Before he has any character development, he's shown to be mistrusting or cold. The first shot of the entire show is him in a cold environment, to be fair. And throughout the season, he opens up, first to Kuiil, then to the child, then to Cara, Omera, Greef, and finally, IG-11. There was solid acting from everyone involved in Season 1, so I'll give characters and acting an 8 out of 10. Purely because I do wish there was more development for Omera and a little bit less overacting on a couple characters in Episode 6. Speaking on the story now, Mando's connection he builds with the characters makes the audience care about them too. An important part of his character is his hatred of droids due to what he went through during the Clone Wars. The first main arc of the series is him reaching a point where he can move past that hatred, which comes to a head in the finale when IG-11 sacrifices himself for the same child that he nearly shot in the first episode. Kuiil's death hurts because we got attached to him at the same time Mando did. We look forward to seeing Greef and Cara the next season because Mando looks forward to it. And most of all, we look forward to learning more about the child because Mando wants to learn more about the child. Everything comes back to him. Story gets an 8 out of 10, purely because it's not perfect, but definitely not the worst season I'll be reviewing here. The music is, as is almost always the norm with Star Wars, impeccable. Ludwig Göransson did the score, creating instantly memorable themes for Mando and the child that come back throughout the seasons, as leitmotifs should. Music gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, we've got my own personal enjoyment. I'm gonna go with another 8 out of 10 here. I really like it, but there's a couple other seasons from shows I enjoy a bit more here. That gives The Mandalorian Season 1 a 43 out of 50, or a high B in school terms. Let's move on to The Mandalorian Season 2. The second season begins to dive more into the wider Star Wars universe, which makes sense as the floodgates were opened when Moff Gideon appeared with the Darksaber in the final scene of Season 1. But before we get to characters, let's touch on the sets and direction, which is another easy 9 out of 10. When I have nothing to say for a category, it's because it speaks for itself by just watching the show. Unfortunately, there's always more to say when something looks bad than when something looks good. But let's go to the characters, acting, and the story. It goes without saying here that Mando and Grogu's arc here is done amazingly, with an incredibly emotional separation in the final episode. It also speaks to Pedro Pascal as an actor that he could become so emotional when just acting with a puppet on set. As for other characters, we all know that Luke Skywalker, Ahsoka Tano, and Boba Fett appear in this season, but they don't really have any arcs. Ahsoka is just a plot device used to move Mando closer to Luke, who himself is just a personification of the end of Grogu's arc. And Boba Fett does exactly what he did in The Empire Strikes Back. Cool stuff. I do want to give a shout out to Bill Burr, whose acting really brought his character Mayfeld to the forefront of Episode 7. He gets his own small arc, where he gets to literally face his past and choose to do better. It's my personal favorite episode of the entire season. While the two main characters shine even brighter than in Season 1, the characters brought in from the wider universe don't get to have a real purpose in the story besides being familiar faces. And for that, I'm rating characters a 7 out of 10. And the story is getting an 8 out of 10 again. Music is, of course, a 10 out of 10 again. I don't know if anyone expected any different, because if there's one thing Star Wars gets right, it's the music. Right? For my personal enjoyment, I almost gave it a 7, but As much as I'm pointing out how useless characters like Ahsoka, Luke, and Bo-Katan were, I didn't even mention her before. Come on, Ahsoka in live action was just awesome. Back then, you just had to be there. It's like how loved Force Awakens was when it came out. It did everything that everyone wanted back then. It barely acknowledged the prequels. It felt exactly like the originals. People loved it. Now we can see that it was much too derivative of the OG, but it's too late now. I still remember how happy I was at seeing Ahsoka in live action, and for that I'm keeping my personal enjoyment at an 8 out of 10. That leaves The Mandalorian Season 2 with a 42 out of 50. Still a B. And speaking of the letter B, let's go to the Book of Boba Fett, released 1 year later at the end of 2021. The Book of Boba Fett is where the Mandoverse, as it's often referred to, starts to lose me. And it's also where these reviews start getting longer. As I said before, there's more to say when something is bad than when it's good. Let's just start with the sets and direction, and I'm gonna come out swinging on this one. It's still really good, but there's definitely some moments with some wonky CGI and weird backgrounds. If you didn't know, recent TV shows starting with Season 1 of The Mandalorian have made use of something called the volume. It's a giant, semicircular LCD screen that projects a background for the actors to play off of instead of having to use a green screen, for example. In fact, it uses Unreal Engine for the environments, which is pretty cool. It was used amazingly in the first 2 seasons of Mando, but with Boba Fett, it feels like some of the directors using it were inexperienced, and it leads to several sections of the show feeling claustrophobic. Specifically the chase scene, if you can even call it that, with the Tatooine gang on their Power Ranger speeder bikes. That was probably just word vomit to most of you, I'm so sorry. It still did have pretty good action sequences though, besides that, so I'm gonna give the Book of Boba Fett's sets and directions a 7 out of 10. As for the characters and story, they sadly suffer here too. This show has 3 main characters, Boba Fett, Fennec Shand, and the Mandalorian. I'm just gonna ignore the Mandalorian for now. Let's start with Fennec Shand. Okay, we're done. Seriously though, they gave Ming-Na Wen absolutely nothing to do in this role. She's just there to give Boba someone to talk to, really. If you want to watch a show where she really shines, watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. It's one of the only good Marvel shows. Anyways, let's talk Boba Fett himself. He gets a half-complete arc in this show. There's some, I guess, light implications that he wants a family, and that ever since Mace Windu killed Jango Fett in Attack of the Clones, he's longed for one. That's a surprising premise for Boba Fett, to be clear. I mean, he gets a crew of the Tatooine gang and the coolest Wookiee on screen since Chewbacca, but is that a family? Is that what he considers a family to be? No clue, he never says. Also, part of the main plot is that he's taking over Jabba the Hutt's territory, which apparently is literally just Tatooine, because he never goes anywhere else in the show. Not even outside of Mos Espa. The main selling point of the show was Boba Fett doing crime lord stuff, and he just doesn't do a dang bit of it. Now let's talk about The Mandalorian. Why am I talking about The Mandalorian? This is the Boba Fett show. So why is he here? Well, he comes into the show because Boba needs some hired enforcers so that he can control all of Mos Espa. They tease this at the end of the 4th episode. As the show was coming out, I was actually really hyped for that tease at the end. And then the next episode came out, and Boba didn't appear once. Again, in the moment when the show was coming out, I still didn't mind. My excuse then was, oh, I see he's gonna visit Grogu off screen, and then we'll see that scene in the opening of Season 3 of The Mandalorian. No. Not only is half of the next episode spent with Ahsoka Tano and Luke Skywalker, Boba Fett appears, but he doesn't speak once. Did they realize they could only think of half of a story for Boba, so they just pivoted the last half of the show to Mando? The biggest mistake of this show is that Grogu leaves Luke and rejoins Mando in Boba Fett's show. It's just plain stupid. I don't see a world where I would believe any reason they could come up with for this. They did it so that Grogu would be guaranteed to appear in every episode of the next season. They did it so that they could sell more Grogu toys. That's it. After such an impeccable send-off, they couldn't even wait until the middle or end of the 3rd season to bring them on back. I'm giving characters a 5 out of 10 and story a 6 out of 10. Music is a 9 out of 10. Like I said, always great music. Just a little lower because there's a few less memorable tracks. For personal enjoyment, I was bored at the beginning, got excited for Mando halfway through, and then had all of my excitement killed in the final episode. However, at the time of release, the episode with Luke was really cool. One thing I'd like to say, never use AI for characters ever again, please. Graham Hamilton, the actor who was Luke's body in that episode, looks exactly like Mark Hamill in real life. Why wasn't it just him? And also, I watched through Star Trek Strange New Worlds recently, and the best part of that show is the actor who plays Spock. Sure, he's not exactly the same as Leonard Nimoy, but that's the point. I was watching the character of Spock. And in Star Wars, I would love to see the character of Luke again, as long as it's not a PNG of him with moving lips that are out of sync with a robotic voice. Sorry for the small rant. Personal enjoyment gets a 7 out of 10. That leaves the Book of Boba Fett with a 34 out of 50, a sharp drop from The Mandalorian. And I hate to say this, but I think it's only gonna get worse. Obi-Wan Kenobi, 2022. Obi-Wan Kenobi was a highly anticipated show. It saw the return of Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker after nearly 17 years. If you ignore the Rise of Skywalker. After Boba, I knew this one was the one that really had to resonate with fans. If they messed this up, it would only further divide the already really divided fan base. For me, I just wanted to see Anakin back, and, well, I'm glad Hayden came back because it means he got better stuff to do in Ahsoka. Starting with sets and direction, it sadly only got worse from Boba Fett. In every lightsaber battle, they chose to use a shaky cam, as if you're watching a Jason Bourne movie. No offense to any Bourners out there. It's impossible to tell what's going on in the final battle. And not only that, the volume is at its worst here. It's shockingly easy to notice how circular every set is. The lightsabers look really weird here too. There's no sparks or flashes when they clash together, and the blades look really plasticky in every scene. Not only that, but the alien effects for the Grand Inquisitor and the Eighth Brother are just lazy. Everything is disappointing to look at. This section gets a 5 out of 10. I'm not going to be kind to the show, I'm sorry. Now we're getting to characters, acting, and story. It goes without saying that Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen gave it their all in this show, but nearly every other character was just bland. Honestly, when the show began, I was actually really excited to see young Leia. And I have to say that she really felt like the character. Vivian Lyra Blair did an excellent job given her age. However, Leia's purpose in the story left something to be desired. The story did do a great job of making every character seem dumb. Sorry, I'm being too biased. Hold on, give me a second. Let me come from a different angle. Let's talk about the decisions that these characters make. Reva, the new Inquisitor for the show, has been secretly rising the ranks so that she can have a shot at killing Darth Vader. So, when Darth Vader is at his most vulnerable, Reva walks up behind him, draws her lightsaber, takes it back, and screams a war cry as loud as she can before having the most wind-up swing possible. Why didn't she just turn it on and stab him? Oh wait, she didn't do that because she knew that it's really easy to survive getting stabbed. Oh, and then she gets stabbed like a minute later. And she survives. And she flies a ship all the way to Tatooine. And she wanders the desert looking for Luke's house. And then she chases him through the night. How is she alive? Whatever. She thinks of all the other dumb decisions she made in the show, and now she's a good guy. By the way, Bail Organa is made to be dumb here too. He mentions every keyword that Reva needs to know where to look for Luke. The children, Tatooine, Owen, protect the boy. What is he doing? Oh well. The other characters are either boring or bland, and there's just no reason to go into detail on them. I'm giving characters a 6 out of 10 because of Obi-Wan and Anakin, and the story a 4 out of 10. This next part is something I'm really sad about. For the first time in Star Wars history, the music is entirely forgettable. That's so sad. I honestly think that's part of my problems for the show as a whole. The music does nothing to draw me into each scene. Of all the shows to have returning leitmotifs from John Williams, like the movies, Obi-Wan Kenobi was the no-brainer. And instead, for some reason, the music just sounds entirely like royalty-free, as if you just downloaded the Space Wars Battle soundtrack. The familiar music only comes in the final episode, and by then, it's too little, too late. Music gets a 6 out of 10. And finally, personal enjoyment gets another 6 out of 10. I was just disappointed nearly the whole time. That leaves poor old Obi-Wan Kenobi with 27 out of 50. If you liked the show, then I'm happy for you. But it didn't work for me, and that's why it's not getting much higher than the 50% I have it at. Now then, we're about to shift gears in a major way, because next up is Andor. Many people would say that Andor is one of the best pieces of Star Wars media, and I would agree with them wholeheartedly. I've heard the opinion that you can't really judge other Star Wars shows by comparing them with the quality of Andor because of how different Andor's tone is. However, I think that at least in terms of character writing and production, Andor represents something that the other shows should strive towards. So let's start with sets and direction and compare that with Obi-Wan Kenobi's sets and direction. Firstly, both shows were made during different heights of the pandemic, which shows that Obi-Wan clearly could have turned out better. Andor used amazing sets, on-location shooting, a great stunt team, and an action choreographer who clearly wasn't afraid of the audience seeing the action. Each separate arc in the show has a different chaotic sequence, like the Ferrix escape, the Narkina 5 prison sequence, the heist sequence, but all of them are shot in a way that lets you know what's going on despite all the chaos. You never lose the action. Every shot has a purpose. Sets and direction is an easy 10 out of 10. Let's go to characters and acting, and comparing the acting of people in the show to other shows is almost laughable. No matter how small the role is, every actor gives so much life to their characters. I don't even remember his name, but the guy who in episode 11 tells Andor that Marva has died was great. He had a handful of scenes. I felt bad when he died in the final episode. I'm sure there's been plenty of YouTube video essays that have analyzed characters like Luthen, Mon Mothma, Andor, Saw Gerrera so much better than I ever could, so after this video, go look those up and watch them. I'm sure they're all great. I do want to give a special shout out to the guy who voices B2 Emo, Dave Chapman. Most of his work is him being a puppeteer, but in what I believe is one of his first big acting roles, he gave life to one of the most adorable and sympathetic droids in the entire Star Wars universe. If they destroy him in Season 2, I may never forgive Lucasfilm. That's really all I can say about the characters, because if you just watch the show, you know that they're all 10 out of 10s before you're even halfway through. Now, the story can't really be compared with any other Star Wars shows because of how unique it is, as I kind of alluded to earlier. Before Andor aired, I heard that its premise was how the rebellion began, and I thought, been there, done that. I love the show Star Wars Rebels, and a large part of that show dealt with bringing together the different rebel cells to form the Rebel Alliance. However, Andor shows a wide range of rebellions, unlike Rebels, which focuses on a single crew. Vel has a line that sums up the entire arc of everyone in the show, and therefore the theme of the show itself. Everyone has their own rebellion. Andor shows each of these rebellions, and it manages to make you care about all of them too. There is one minuscule issue I have, and that's that Cassian looking for his sister does not come up after the 7th episode. I assume that plot will come back in Season 2, which airs as of recording this in just a month, but I don't really know what purpose it has in the show, right now. For that, I'm giving the story 9 out of 10. But if they manage to wrap it up good, then you know that it's going to be 10 out of 10 next season. Music is the next category, and I'm pretty sure that this soundtrack references no themes from the previous Star Wars media. Despite this, its main theme became one of my favorite of the entire franchise, and just listen to the opening title theme of the final episode and you'll get why, I think. Another 10 out of 10. Finally, we have my personal enjoyment, and I think it'll be obvious, considering what I've been saying this whole time. It's 10 out of 10. That gives Andor a 49 out of 50. As I just said, if they wrap up that sister plot line and make everything else just as good as it was in Season 1, there's no way Andor Season 2 isn't a 50 out of 50. That was nice, wasn't it? Isn't good TV wonderful? I'm just glad we're going back to The Mandalorian. Its first 2 seasons were awesome. The Mandalorian Season 3 was doomed the moment Grogu was given back to Mando in the Book of Boba Fett. Season 3 takes a storyline that many were looking forward to, the reclaiming of Mandalore for all Mandalorians, and gives it to Bo-Katan. I hate to say this, but not only does Grogu have no business being in Season 3, but neither does Din Djarin. I'll get to that in a bit, but first let's start with sets and direction. Admittedly, The Mandalorian almost always does pretty well in this department. I personally don't think it looks very cheap, and while the volume is still noticeable, it's not nearly as egregious as in Kenobi. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. Now we're on to the characters. And it feels like since Pedro Pascal couldn't show up in person for this season, that the writers got scared and just decided to abandon his storyline and just give it all to Bo-Katan's character. She's basically the main character for this season. Sadly, this means that Mando and Grogu effectively have no business being in this show. Neither of them change, neither of them grow. I mean, Grogu was still a baby, it was already hard to give him an arc, so this time they didn't even try. And Mando, good grief, they almost reverse his character. Why is he so mad at droids in the 6th episode? IG-11 helped him move past that. He called R2-D2 a friend in the Book of Boba Fett. He literally has an astromech droid this season that he never gets mad at. And by the way, even though Bo-Katan is basically the main character in this season, she doesn't really have an arc either. She has a storyline, but she doesn't have an arc. She doesn't change or grow. She just decides to take back her homeworld with encouragement from Mando. And then she does it. Cool. Masterful writing. Weirdly enough, the only character that does change is Dr. Pershing. He gets an entire episode to himself, and then he gets killed at the end, I think. Granted, it was a good episode, but it felt like it was just an episode from the New Republic show that got scrapped. There's also more cameos this season, like Zeb from Rebels, and Jack Black and Lizzo from The Real World. They may as well have been time travelers from Earth, because they did not attempt to act at all. The 6th episode destroyed me. Christopher Lloyd was in it too, I don't remember why. Characters gets a 4 out of 10. Absolutely awful. The story is actually something I'm gonna be kind of kinder to. Despite the characters essentially being reduced to action figures this season, I'd like to commend the writers for at least knowing when to wrap up a storyline. I'm glad that Moff Gideon is dead, I'm glad that Mandalore has been retaken, and I'm very glad that Mando and Grogu are kind of just normal people again. They don't care that they've met Luke Skywalker, Bo-Katan, Ahsoka Tano. They're just living. That's nice. Story gets a 6 out of 10. Music. At least the music's not going to be bad for the rest of the video. Music gets a 9 out of 10. Personal enjoyment is a bit tricky on this one. While I have a lot of complaints, I was also very glad that they wrapped up the major storylines from the first 2 seasons. It almost made watching every episode worth it. But it's still getting 6 out of 10. That gives The Mandalorian Season 3 a 32 out of 50. Yeah, I do think it's kind of worse than the Book of Boba Fett. I think that's an unpopular opinion. Not sure. Now let's move on to Ahsoka, and this might be another controversial one. Ahsoka is a very interesting show. There's so much that I really like about it, and yet there's also so much that just misses the mark. Let's start with sets and direction, and overall, Ahsoka does a great job in this department. The fight scenes are way easier to follow and more fun to watch, the lightsabers look much better than in Kenobi, the costumes look great, and the VFX isn't distracting. Besides that one part in episode 7 where Ahsoka jumps out of the ship. I'm giving this section an 8 out of 10. As for characters and acting, this is where it gets a little worse. The biggest problem with this show is that all the characters in it have appeared in a different show before this. Ahsoka is from the Clone Wars, while Sabine and Hera are from Rebels. This means that the three main characters have already gone through their life-changing arcs. They have become who they are now in different shows. So what happens now? What will these new experiences in this show do to them to change them? Turns out, nothing. The only changes they face are physical. Sabine learns how to use the Force, and Ahsoka puts on a new cool outfit. And I'll be clear, Ahsoka does go through an arc, but it's over in the first half of the season. It's great to see Anakin again, and he helps her to overcome her fear, which is that she is the worst parts of him. But it's vaguely presented in the show, and I had to rewatch the 5th episode several times before I fully got what the arc was. Meanwhile, Sabine essentially reverts to her Season 1 Rebels' rebellious-esque self. It's revealed that her family died on Mandalore during the Purge, as mentioned in the Mandalorian show, but she doesn't really seem like she's affected too much by this. None of the characters really react to anything going on around them. Sabine looks like she can barely muster a hug for Ezra when she sees him again after 10 years. And Hera is probably my biggest missed opportunity for this show. Kanan is perhaps my favorite Jedi in the franchise, and I really wanted to see how Hera would handle raising her and Kanan's kid on her own. I wanted to see how she'd handle telling Jason that his father was a Jedi. Hera was a great leader in Rebels, so what if the story beat was that she struggled to lead her own child? Sadly, nothing really comes of Jason in this series, except a really cool scene where he taps into the Force. But the thing is, the whole show really amounts to a collection of cool scenes that get the overall story of the Star Wars universe where it needs to go, without really trying to see how the characters are affected by it. Characters and acting gets a 5 out of 10. The story is technically really important for the Star Wars galaxy, and I'm interested in seeing how it culminates, but it didn't really leave too much of an impact on me. Thrawn isn't really a character. He's almost the equivalent of the Galactus Cloud from the second Fantastic Four movie. He's just an ambiguous threat. I'm pretty sure they never even said what his plan is. However, in the moment, it was still enticing to watch, especially as a longtime Rebels fan, so I can't help but give this section a 6 out of 10. The music, though, is something that really stood out to me when watching this show. Kevin Kiner and his family were at the top of their game for this soundtrack. I genuinely think it's some of the best Star Wars music since the movies, and it's a large part of why I still think of the show fondly overall. I'm giving the music a 10 out of 10, and as I just alluded to, my personal enjoyment is still pretty high, and I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. That leaves Ahsoka with a total score of 37 out of 50. Now, we're at the most controversial Star Wars show yet, The Acolyte. When it was first announced, The Acolyte was the show that I was most interested in. A new time period, new characters, new settings, no Empire, no Rebels, new status quos, etc. The possibilities seemed endless, and after the first trailer dropped, I was even more excited. But now that the finished product is out, let's just say it's not what I wanted. Okay, let's start with the good, aka the sets and direction, because the production design was easily the best part of the show. They actually filmed on location for a lot of the show, as well as making new sets, which is great because you don't notice the volume very much. And of course, I have to mention the action scenes, which those specifically were the best parts of the show. The lightsaber fights were quick, snappy, interesting to watch, fun. They were the best fights since the prequels. And not just the lightsaber fights, all action scenes had cool martial arts in them. It was just amazing ideas. I think I'm gonna give this section a 9 out of 10 because it just really was impressive. But don't you worry, Acolyte haters, because now we're talking about the characters, the acting, and the story. Again, let's start with the good. Sol and Kymir were the most compelling parts of the show. It was fascinating to see a Jedi cover up his past mistakes without really turning to the dark side in the process, and Manny Jacinto played his two characters wonderfully. I could have done without the weird tension between Kymir and Osha, though. Oh well. Speaking of Osha, she and May were the main characters of the show, so how are they? I don't say this very lightly, and I always try to be kind to the actors who are playing these characters that we may not enjoy, but I just didn't think Amandla Steinberg's acting was very good for this show. Vernestra Rowe, a character from the High Republic novels, also appeared in this show. The actress looked like she didn't want to be there, which is weird considering she's the showrunner's wife. And I want to make it clear that this is my opinion, and I'm sure that both of these actresses have had better roles where they play better characters. It's just that this role was not great for me. And reminder, anyone who hunts actors down to berate them, hate them, try to stalk them, whatever these people do, those are completely in the wrong. These are opinions about a TV show. It's not that deep. I just didn't like the acting. That's all. No hating on actors personally in the comments, please. Anyways, after Sol and Chimere, other characters didn't really grab me either. I liked Yord a lot, but he was killed before he could really do anything interesting, and in fact, a lot of characters that I liked were killed before they could do anything interesting. This next statement is going to be a controversial one. The Acolyte shares a lot of its mistakes with the prequel trilogy. They have great ideas on paper, but when it comes down to it, the character acting and the dialogue are just not very good. Look, I can barely watch Attack of the Clones. I think nostalgia has blinded a lot of people when it comes to that and The Phantom Menace, which is better, but still, it's not great. Anakin's fall to the dark side is great when you read about it, but in the movies it just unfolds a little too fast. And I say this as someone who loves Return of the Jedi. That's not the name of the movie. It's called Revenge of the Sith. I'm gonna leave that in. The Acolyte similarly has a great premise. After a Jedi is murdered, how will the Sith stay hidden? Unfortunately, like the prequels, the Acolyte's bland dialogue and acting led it down a path of just mediocrity. I really wanted to like the Acolyte's story, but at a certain point, it just felt old and predictable, which is weird considering it's in an entirely new portion of the Star Wars timeline. Yeah, all the Jedi in the show are gonna die so the Sith can stay hidden. That's so the lore can stay intact. May and Osha are gonna switch places for some reason, no matter how convoluted the reasoning is. I'm mainly just disappointed in it, like Kenobi. Characters and acting get a 5 out of 10. Also, remember how I said that music was gonna be good from this point on? Yeah, sorry, I forgot about the Acolyte. Throughout the entire show, I didn't hear a single recurring theme or leitmotif for these characters. And I mean new themes. I just didn't have a piece of music to associate with them. It felt like it was just there to be background noise, fill the scene, not actually to characterize anyone. Music gets a 5 out of 10. And we're at personal enjoyment, which, again, it's gonna be low. It's a 6 out of 10. The action scenes were amazing enough to keep me coming back from week to week, which is kind of to be commended, but it's not enough to save the Acolyte from getting a total of 30 out of 50. And yes, its sets and directions did make it better than Kenobi for me, which I'm sure is going to be a shock. But we've got one final show left, and I'm happy to say that it is going to be a banger. Star Wars Skeleton Crew. I mentioned that The Acolyte was the show I was looking forward to the most, right? Well, Skeleton Crew was the opposite. I went into the show with rock bottom expectations, and I left with one of the most fun TV watching experiences I've had in a very long time. It's still kind of new, so if you haven't seen it, then I recommend you go watch it before I go into the spoiler territory that I've done with all the other reviews in this video. If you like fun, family-friendly shows with low stakes, then I think you'll enjoy it. Alright, let's talk about Skeleton Crew's sets and direction. This show did an outstanding job of making every location feel real to the universe. There were only a couple moments where I thought I could see the seam of the volume, and the action set pieces were, while definitely different from other shows, still very entertaining. And hey, that speeder sequence in the final episode was way better than the Tatooine gang from Boba Fett. I'm gonna give sets and direction a 9 out of 10. Characters and acting is a very important part of this review because Skeleton Crew's main 4 cast members are kids, and I'm sure that everyone watching is wondering how they did. Thankfully, the kids were easily the best part of the show. The 4th episode with Neil and the 6th episode with KB were amazing character building, and I'm really glad that the finale gave Fern and Wim the spotlight. I especially like how it showed Fern and Wim using each other's techniques and tactics, which is a stark contrast from the 1st episode with them. And you know how I mentioned that Kenobi made every character seem dumb? Well, this show makes every character seem smart even when they make the wrong decisions. Whenever something happened in the show that I'd usually think is a plot hole, they would address it either in that episode or the next. In the 2nd episode, the audience wonders why Jod didn't just escape before the kids got there, and in the 3rd episode, Jod clarifies why. Everyone wonders if Jod can actually use the Force or if he's just faking or using technology, and in the same episode, they have the kids discussing that exact topic. They use the curiosity of the kids to address the questions that the audience comes up with, and that's kind of awesome. And I have to say that Jude Law does an excellent job of flipping a switch and turning into a ruthless pirate. His performance in the 7th episode was amazing, and the nuance that he brought back to the role in the finale made his character even better. I'm giving characters and acting an 8 out of 10. As for the story, I think it's really solid, albeit not terribly original. In terms of a spin on classic treasure hunt movies, it does change some things up. Specifically, the kids in this are uninterested in the treasure because it turns out that the treasure is just where their home is. The only trope that I had a problem with was the space pirates. I do wish they had a few more differences from real-life pirates. I liked the arcs that each kid had, and I especially liked the choice to make Jod so villainous in the final episodes. I was just a little disappointed in how the season ended. I think as little as 5 extra minutes of an epilogue could have really helped tie everything up, especially since a season 2 isn't guaranteed. Either way, I'm giving the story a 7 out of 10. Not bad, not perfect, but very entertaining. Now the music was amazing in this show. Each leitmotif was established perfectly. You knew exactly who was showing up or who was doing something important by the music that was playing. The pirate theme, Jod's theme, and the kids' theme are all things that I can whistle off the top of my head now. Mick Giacchino is following in his father's footsteps. 10 out of 10. And finally, personal enjoyment, which is a 9 out of 10. I don't really know why I liked it so much. I just felt really happy every time a new episode came on. The complete opposite reaction that Kenobi gave me. And I'm sorry for all the Kenobi bashing. I promise I won't do it again in this video. Because the video's kind of over. Skeleton Crew gets a total score of 43 out of 50, tying with Mando Season 1 for the number 2 spot. With that, at least until Andor Season 2 comes out, my rankings for every season of every live-action Star Wars TV show are complete. I really hope you all stuck around for the entire video, and if you did, let me know what you think of these shows in the comments and subscribe while you're down there. I'll put the final scores for each season in a pinned comment a day or so after the video is up. I'm sure YouTube doesn't like that I'm doing all these different kinds of videos, especially with such long waits between them, but I hope that if you did watch this entire video that you really enjoyed it. See you all next time.